Good evening, folks. You're listening to Northeast Truth Radio, hosted by TNS Radio. Check us out online, northeasttruth.com. Join us in the chat room at our social network at northetruth.ning.com. And hello to our listeners in the TNS Radio chat room also. Our host for this evening, Simon John Wood. Are you there, Simon?
I am, mate. Hiya.
Excellent. Now, our next guest, I'm going to give you a brief rundown of the info, and then I'll let Simon tell you who it is, if you haven't heard me mention him earlier. We, the people, will not be chipped.com. The Neo Verichip inside movement is based on the irrefutable fact that mankind has inalienable human rights that are absolute and cannot be debased nor perverted. Human life cannot be degraded to a 16-digit RFID chip number embedded under your skin under any circumstance. By uniting on this common ground, we can send a strong message to the IBM-funded Verichip that we the people will not be chipped. Our current guest has spoken at the Alternative View talks, which is available on DVD, where he explains the agenda in explicit detail, including areas of predictive programming, and obviously the psychological operation side of the human microchipping agenda. Simon, who's tonight's guest?
Our guest tonight is Greg Nikolettos. Hi, Greg. How are you doing, mate?
How are you guys? Glad that you have me on. Thanking you.
Right, mate. Let's get straight on with it after that expansive opening blurb.
Absolutely.
Just before we got cracking into the show tonight, we were talking about the current state of affairs in Australia. Just want to run back over that. I feel like I'm privy to something everybody should know.
Yeah, we just moved into an election, and it was the typical, pork barreling where, for 1 to 2 months we were just bombarded with campaigns that just, tabled into the millions of dollars. So, we had a choice of whether you were choosing Labor or Liberals, so basically the left wing or the right wing. And how the dust actually settled was we ended up in a hung parliament. So you had, the Labor Party basically ending up on roughly 74 seats, the Liberal Party ending up at about 73 to 74. And what actually happened was the general consensus now amongst Australians is they are starting to feel that they are not being represented. So they're paying their taxes, but the parties which are really meant to be, totally different in policy, we are starting to see, this beast that really has two heads in a sense, but it does really have the same policy. So for the first time, we have now actually seen independents rise to the point where we have now 3 independents who have actually managed to retain seats and enter into Parliament and into the upper house, if you like. And these are the guys that will now be able to actually control the legislation as it moves through Parliament. So even though the media, for example, is demonising the whole process, saying, Australia will fall into anarchy and the sky will fall out of the sky and everyone will basically will not be able to bring, will not have a job or put food on the table. It's nothing. This is probably the best situation Australia can actually find itself in, because now legislation that has to actually go through, there are a lot more hurdles to jump. There's a lot more capacity to obviously strike down legislation that would otherwise normally just be rammed through. And so I can say for the first time ever, in a long time, we're talking 50, 60 years, where the Australian political system is actually looking far more like a democracy, simply because the swinging vote is on a knife edge. So you really have the major controlling party now, which is Labor, really only has a controlling of 1 seat. So, and that's not to say that the independents can't obviously swap from one to the other as well down the track if they feel as though their agendas aren't being implemented. So if you listen to it from the mainstream media, it's doom and gloom, but if you actually have have a brain and you can critically think, it's one of the best things that Australia could actually find itself in. The only bad thing that has occurred through this is the Greens are now starting to get a foothold into government, and obviously the agendas on their side is to obviously put a price on carbon. And coming from our perspective, the whole thing that will mesh the smart grid into place, if you like, will actually be the price on carbon. So when you can actually put a price on carbon and then basically have human beings as obviously being carbon emitters, and you have animals being carbon emitters and farmers being carbon emitters, well, then you are bringing a smart grid into place, because what they will say is, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So obviously you'll have large companies like Sun and Cisco and IBM and Hewlett-Packard, and they have the infrastructures in place where, and everyone's starting to see it, with the smart grid or reduce your electricity and the like. And the next step from that is not to obviously reduce your electricity. It has nothing to do with that. It's really got to do with getting a foothold into your household to gauge how much electricity you're actually using, so you can basically be monetised.
Yeah, because we've covered so many topics in that first thing that listeners must know what the hell we're talking about. I apologise because I made the mistake of starting to talk to Greg before we went on to air, and we got so carried away. I was that fascinated. I had to try and bring you up to speed at least. One of the things that that touches on with us, it's interesting that you described what's happened in Australia since you had a hung parliament. It's a totally different zeitgeist, I think, to what we've seen develop here with a hung parliament. We haven't heard about a 2 or 3 independent members standing and holding the balance of power, if you like, between the two different parties. That just hasn't seemed to have materialised in Britain at all. That's possibly due to my ignorance of the exact numbers that they've got and all that kind of thing. But we have a hung parliament too in the same way, and yet our zeitgeist's been totally different. We haven't all of a sudden seen the powers that be having to roll back the power a little bit. Probably the other way around in this country. But anyway, to bring people up to speed with what we're actually talking about tonight, Greg, our guest tonight, is the progenitor, the guy who actually started the site We the People Will Not Be Chipped. And that is all about RFID, transhumanism, all these different issues. Greg, one of the things I wanted to ask you about was, although on the face of it seems to be mostly about RFID, the actual issues behind this are really about the commoditisation of people. Is that right, more or less, what we're talking about?
It is. I mean, what it comes down to, the agenda at the end of the day is you have a small segment of the ruling elite that is realistically trying to implement branding. So what we are really seeing is the transition, where technology is actually moving to, and this is with location-based advertising. So for example, with your smartphones now, you can take a photo, and the photo itself will actually geotag itself, so people will know where you were when you actually took that photo. So that's just one example of how technology is actually starting to hone in on you, the individual, who you are, what you're doing, and basically to the point where we can even propose where you'll be going next. But the major driver behind this is really it's about to create a trademark or a distinctive identifying name on yourself through the product of the actual manufacturer. So just like in the old days where you actually had, the mark burnt into the flesh of a criminal, this branding, if you like, goes back thousands of years. It was done by the Romans, it was done by the Greeks, and the reason to mark someone is realistically just to show ownership. So it is a case of... brand, isn't it? Absolutely, it is a slave brand, and I mean the Greeks used it with the letter D to to signify the word doulos, which meant slave, and when we speak to different people from different walks of life, and they say, well, why shouldn't I get microchip, for example? And you do have a percentage of people that don't see it as a problem. They just see it as technology being in progress and something that is inevitable. Now, the problem with all this is you basically have large companies such as Verichip that obviously seed funded by IBM, and would you trust your identity? Would you trust actually putting an actual product into yourself that is controlled by a company that is actually floated on the actual stock market? So, the more you dig, it just becomes a classic case of this is human branding, but obviously delivered in a 21st century model.
Yeah. It seems self-evident to me that the whole point is to managerialize the entire planet, basically. You need a barcode on everything in order to know where it is at any minute and what it's doing. Some of the technology that I've looked into when researching, when I knew you were coming on, Greg, is just mind-boggling. I wasn't aware that we were a matter of months away from a skull cap that can read your mind, so that you can play of all things computer games, basically. The new Wii controller apparently is a matter of months away from release.
Exactly, and I mean, look, you've got Mattel has got into it on the on the actual on the toy element of or the toy aspect, where you have the light control saber, where you can actually move components. But the thing is, what we need to see as well as as parents, and I have a 5-year-old, for example. He watches cartoons, so I'm not the perfect parent, but sometimes I do need some downtime as well. But I did say to him that it was about a month ago. I said, Zach, how many cartoons are actually mentioning brain chips? And he actually rattled off 4 cartoons from Billy and Mandy, I think it was iCarly, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and another one. So what we need to see is that this agenda is being rolled out to the youth, and when you actually start rolling it into the entertainment model, and you will see a lot more of that obviously now with the Xbox Natal coming out as well, and Natal, whichever way you look at it, that they say that it originates from that's the operating name, but Natal obviously means the birth of something. So to me, when I looked at the Xbox system, I just see that as being the birth of a biometric military-industrial system in people's homes, and basically sugar-coated and wrapped in fun and games. So, when my Xbox can basically start, OCRing and seeing, biometrically picking up my digits on my hands and iris scanning me. I mean, I have major issues with that. Never mind, picking up your voice biometrics and the like. So, do we trust companies like Microsoft? And the answer is, how could you?
Yeah. Why would you? Given their past record. That segues quite nicely. I looked at some of the stuff you'd done, and forgive me if I pronounce this wrong, but is it the holograph machine that the Nazi Germany was using? No, that
was close. It was the Hollerith machine, and
right.
And, these are the companies. So, for example, the Hollerith machine, was created by the German inventor Hermann Hollerith, and that's where IBM actually began as a company. They actually began as a census company, and they still do the census to this day, for countries like for England, for example. You have IBM actually doing the census for China, and for Australia. So, regardless of where the alliances are in the military-industrial complex, if you like, you can see that these companies operate far above countries' alliances. It's almost as though you have these new superpowers